What is going on, folks? It is your boy Steiner here with another episode of Secondhand Talent. We are going to jump right into it. We have with us the creator and host of the Produce Stand podcast, the Yes We're Open podcast, and the Just Good Business podcast, as well as a player in the Weekends and the Royal Pains, all the way from Ontario, Canada. Allan Grego, ladies and gentlemen. Al, how are you now?
Good, and you?
Not so bad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. We're happy to have you.
Thank you for inviting me on.
Well, fun fact, we have filmed content in Canada early on in the show. But 2 years ago from the time of this taping, we filmed a couple of episodes there while we were visiting my wife's family in Montreal. She was on the show, but in America. But you are our first Canadian in Canada guest. So I'm super excited to ask you this question. We met in a really roundabout fashion, which we'll get to. When I first approached you and said, "Hey, I have a podcast called Secondhand Talent, and I'd like for you to be on it," what did you think? What came to mind when you heard the term secondhand talent?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I remember. I mean, I thought, well, that's an interesting title. I wonder what that's about and why he'd want to interview me, because I believe we met in a Shoresy subreddit too. So, like, what does that have to do with talent? But here we are. We're talking.
Well, you know what? I'll take it. Not knowing what it means is definitely a good exemplification of what it means. It's a brand new title. It's a brand new thing. We're in season 5 and it's still brand new. What we do is we shine the spotlight on the people who shine the spotlights. We look at all the other villagers in the village it takes to make live entertainment, or any entertainment for that matter. And what you have a hand in are the creation of some award-winning podcasts, but one of them specifically, which we're going to get to, is the Produce Stand podcast. And for our American listeners and viewers who are not familiar with the smash television shows Letterkenny and Shoresy, first of all, I'd go ahead and get on that, and I'd just let that one marinate.
Yeah, give your balls a tug and go watch.
Give your balls a tug, for fuck's sake. They're just two incredible shows created by the incomparable Jared Keeso, a former junior hockey player himself, and my wonderful wife Steiner and I had the pleasure of seeing the Shoresy Fall Classic in Chicago at Rosemont. The cast of Shoresy took on the alumni of the Chicago Blackhawks at the Rosemont Arena. And then we got to meet all of them afterwards at the Dolo performance at Bub City in Chicago. Shout out Dolo, shout out Jared, shout out to everybody. Fun fact, actually, Tony Ryan, who plays the beloved Hitch on Shoresy, was playing for the Habs the first time my wife ever saw them.
Really? Well, that is a small world story. Yes, I mean, because he was his NHL career didn't last very long, so that would have been a very small window.
It was during the 96-97 season, I believe.
Yeah.
And she got to tell him that at Bub City, and that was pretty fantastic. But the reason I bring all that up is because one of the things that you do that I love is you provide this bridge between the numerous amounts of fans of this show. And as you said, we met in a subreddit rather accidentally. And the reason I brought you on is because this show that you've created is force unto itself and has become its own beast. And like I said, provides this kind of conduit to, from the show to the fans. Before we get into all of that, you do a whole bunch of other things. Now, I want to make sure I'm getting this correctly. On your website, you have a very lengthy biography. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. I have father, podcaster, musician, content creator. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, I think you got them all there. Yeah.
All right, fantastic.
And head bottle washer too, I think is I believe that was saying from a radio show here in Toronto one time. Yeah.
Well, what was it that got you into media in the first place? I would imagine podcasts weren't around, so I would think that your first foray in entertainment would have been music.
It was music, and actually, because I'm an old man, you know, I originally got into it. I wanted to, record in, work in recording studios. So straight out of high school, I went to a school called Trebas Institute in Toronto, and my dream was I was going to work in recording studios. I was going to be a producer or engineer in recording studios. That was my dream. Um, and that was kind of also in a very interesting time because it was just as analog was being replaced by digital. So in the same year that I started, school, I was learning how to splice 2-inch tape with a razor blade and grease pen, making edits that way. And then in another class, I was learning how to Control C, Control V, copy and paste in the digital editor, right? And this whole new digital world was like amazing. Oh my God, I can't believe it's this easy to do right on a computer. Mind
Mm.
you, back then, you could fit maybe 9 seconds of a sample on a floppy disk, right? Like it was very young, very new,
And
very.
for those of our viewers who don't know what a floppy disk is,
It's that
just go
little icon, the little save icon you have in most of your software. That's a
just
floppy disk.
Google it.
Yeah.
Google it. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how it was really early on, you know. Um, but then and I finished the program and realized that there's just no money in it. I mean, what was I thinking? Choosing a career in which my main customers and clients were other unemployed musicians, right? It was bad. It was a bad choice. Anyway, so I went back to the same school and they had this new program that are called new media or digital media or something like that. And that's where I learned how to use Photoshop, use Adobe Premiere, edit sound, edit video, edit images. All this stuff was brand new. I was like working with Photoshop version 1, and
Wow.
digital video was like it took hours and hours and hours to render a 30-second, 320 by 240 frame or whatever. Like it was in its infancy, but I was learning all this stuff and I was able to apply it as a multimedia developer. So that I got into multimedia right away, and that turned into a career in e-learning, which is training, like online learning. But only recently, back in the pandemic, did I start podcasting. So my podcasting career actually only started 4 or 5 years ago.
What was it that made you want to get into that realm? Was it
The podcasting?
was it a connection to the show? Was it a lack of creative output?
Well,
What was
yeah.
was it,
So
product of
what
that?
happened was, I mean, I
Yeah.
was always a huge podcast fan. Like I listened to a lot of them. Like I was an early adopter, back in, when podcasts really started. So I always knew that it was something I was interested in doing because of my audio background and interest. You know, a career in radio was kind of interesting to me, but radio was dying. So it's like, well, there's this new thing called podcasting. Maybe that's what I want to do. I had the skills for it because I learned how to do, I was an audio engineer, so I could do that, but I just needed an idea for content, right? And that's usually the hardest part to start a podcast is figuring out what you want to do because there's 4 million podcasts around the world, and there's a million movie podcasts that are going to be better than anything I can do. There's a million music podcasts that are going to be better than anything I can do. So what the hell am I going to do? So fast forward to the pandemic, and as you mentioned, I'm also a musician. Everything shuts down.
Mhm.
All the gigs are gone. Like the bars
Yep.
are closed. So there are no gigs. And I'm sitting at home with my wife and 2 kids, working from home. They're schooling from home. We're trapped for months, right? I have no creative outlet. I'm like, well, if I'm going to start and I'm not unique in this because I think during the pandemic, more podcasts were started, per cap.
Yeah, I think that's probably when the term podcast just became part of the standard lexicon, I would
Yeah.
say is 2020 is a good.
I mean, there
Yeah.
was some touchstones before that, but yeah, definitely during the pandemic, everyone and their dogs was starting a podcast. Literally, I feel like there's podcasts out there with people and their dogs. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So okay, so now I'm at home. I'm like, all right, we're going to do a podcast. What are we going to do it on? What's the subject matter? And I'm like, one of the early podcasts that I really enjoyed listening to was the Lost. You remember the TV show Lost?
Sure.
Yeah, so that was one of those shows where people would
I
watch.
I do remember there was a Lost podcast.
Yeah, it was with Jay and Dan, I think, or something like that. And anyway, it was an after show where they would talk about each episode, and they've built a community around it. And Lost is one of those shows where you watched it week to week. You couldn't wait to get to work the next day and talk about it around the water cooler. It was one of those shows that had like, it was very mysterious, and what are they going to do next? Kind of like what's happening right now with Severance, right?
I no spoilers. I
Oh,
fucking love that show.
right.
Great, yeah, great comparison to the early seasons. I think they just didn't realize what they were doing with it with Lost, but I'll keep my opinions to myself.
No, I 100% agree. But those early seasons of Lost were so much
Oh,
fun, so
oh
much
my
fun.
God, some of the best television.
Exactly. And I, so, watching a TV show and you got to become a fan of it and you're like starving for more content. So you start looking around, and back then, there was like message boards and other community chats and stuff. And there's this thing called a podcast. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I listened to it going, oh, it's like a radio show about my favorite topic.
Right,
That's
right.
perfect. So that was kind of like my gateway into podcast. And after that, I just started radio. Like once I learned how to connect my MP3 player in my car, radio was dead. All I listened to was podcasts in my car because I could program my own radio. It's like, okay, I'm going to listen to this about Lost. I'm going to listen to some Smodcast because I'm a Kevin Smith fan. I'm going to listen to Adam Carolla at the time. I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like I could program my own radio, and that was so appealing to me. So
That's I mean, I was just gonna say real quickly, as a content creator yourself, I feel
yeah,
like that's the ultimate control, is to be able to, like choose what content you take in about what topic.
yeah, exactly. So that's what happened. Fast forward to the pandemic again, and we're like, well, what am I gonna do? Oh, how about an after show like Lost? But what TV show? So I started looking for TV shows that I enjoyed that maybe were underserved, with like that didn't have a podcast. And I stumbled on Letterkenny. My co-host Matt, like almost a year before that, said, "Oh, you got to check out this Canadian show called Letterkenny." So I'm actually late to the game. Like I only started watching Letterkenny when it was already like on season 8.
Oh yeah.
Because I didn't have access to it. Like it was on Crave, which is a streaming platform that I didn't pay for and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, it looks interesting, but I'll never watch it. But now I was like, okay, we started watching. I'm like, oh my God, this thing is brilliant. Like from the first scene, I'm like, this is a brilliant show. It's funny, it's progressive, it's just hilarious, and it's all sorts of wrong. Like I loved it. I and it's funny. So as I was watching this show, my wife caught me watching a few episodes, and one episode in particular, Fart Book, which I'm sure you're familiar with. She was watching this going, what the it's a very controversial episode. For those who haven't watched Letterkenny, many people say just skip Fart Book and you'll be okay. Um,
I haven't heard that.
'Cause it's a very juvenile kind of, on the surface, it's just a
I
bunch of fart jokes, right?
I think it's quintessential to like the Letterkenny
Sure,
like
now it is, but
pantheon, but
yeah, at the time it was like, yeah, that's stupid. Anyway, and my wife was watching this going, "What's wrong with you? You're smarter than this. Why are you watching this crap?" And I'm like, "No, it's actually a really smart show. It looks dumb, but it's actually really smart and progressive." And so I was trying to convince her, and that's when the light bulb moment happened. Like, my podcast is going to be me and my friends convincing you that Letterkenny is a good show. So that's what we did, because I didn't want it to be a straight fan show where we're just going to go on and gush about it. I wanted to have a little bit of conversation, dissension. And as it turns out, because there's 4 of us, there's myself, my wife, and 2 of my friends, Matt and Victor. Victor wasn't a huge fan of it either, and neither was Tanya, my wife. So Matt and I were kind of the fanboys, and so many episodes are us arguing with each other, going, why this is good, and the other 2 are saying this is kind of crap or juvenile or whatever. I mean, and spoiler alert, we finally got my wife to come around to see the light. And she now loves the show and everything about it. Now we're watching the spin-off Shoresy and doing the same thing. But it was, yeah. So that's how it started. It started out of, I needed a creative outlet. We were locked in our homes, not locked in the homes, but you know what I mean? Like everything was shut down. There's nothing else to do. This was our way of gathering every week with our friends and just forgetting what's going on outside and just focusing on having some fun with our friends online. And it's turned, we're about to hit 5 years in July. And yeah, it's been great, and we've had
Uh,
a lot of really great experiences too. So
It's an incredible achievement. I mean, and just, looking, getting to the point, I think like it's a podcast like unspoken milestone when you're just numbering your episodes
mm,
instead of naming each one. We're still in the naming stage, but starting next season, we'll have Secondhand Talent 100,
yeah,
and the longevity of the show, I think, is a testament to you know, how good it really is. And I love the fact that there is that back and forth because I had to have that same argument with my wife about
mm,
getting into it and saying no, no, but listen, like, and she had gotten into Shoresy first, which
right.
is even tougher hill to climb. Fortunately, she's a hockey fan,
Mm,
and we were she was watching. I think it was maybe like the second episode or some or it was like, yeah, maybe the second episode. She was like, this is fucking terrible. And I was like, no, but like you got to get to the third episode,
mm,
and then you got to meet his family, and
mm,
then it becomes a real show.
right.
Like, you just trust me. Try. And by the end of the fourth episode, she was just like, let's fucking go. Like let's like we need like
Yeah,
give your balls a tug, tit fucker. Like fucking like let's like all the time. Fucking Steiner, give your balls a tug.
yeah,
Fucking
yeah.
all of a sudden she's a bigger fan than I am, and we wind up watching all of Letterkenny, and it's like it's almost like a real life King of the Hill.
Yeah, sure. Letterkenny is for sure, and
Yeah.
it's a very specific brand of humor. A lot of people compare it to Trailer Park Boys, but it's funny because
I
I'm
made that comparison a lot,
yeah,
and I think that that's an adolescent comparison because they're both Canadian shows, and
I think on the surface maybe like because it looks like it's just you know Letterkenny's about a bunch of dumb hicks, and Trailer Park Boys is a bunch of dumb trailer trash or whatever.
Degens.
Degens, right? But I never really became a fan of Trailer Park Boys. My brother, who's 5 years younger than I am, loved Trailer Park Boys, loved it. I just couldn't get into it. Um, but Letterkenny, to me, Letterkenny is smart. Again, on the surface, it looks sophomoric, lots of dick and fart jokes, but it's all for a very progressive, smart end.
I always thought Trailer Park Boys was a smarter show than people made it out to be,
Yeah,
and I still though uh, agree that it's not necessarily the most appropriate comparison because Trailer Park Boys, I mean, I am the liquor,
mhm,
like characters like Leahy, and all that, like they went for that belly busting gut humor, the real like Three Stooges kind of slapstick stuff.
yeah,
And Letterkenny, Shoresy, you know, the hockey in there is real hockey. With both Shoresy and Letterkenny, they really rely on that cerebral humor.
mhm,
And yeah, they could be talking about, Bondar chasing a batch, but they could also be talking about like real issues in the same with the same mannerisms. And and again, it really reminds me of King of the Hill because each one of those characters, Boomhauer and Dale uh uh Hank uh and I'm forgetting his name.
yeah. I was
um
I was never a big King of the Hill fan, but yeah,
what
yeah. No, I mean,
you
like, I'm aware of it, but yeah,
you should be because it's a good show.
your impressions are great, though.
Thank you.
I know it enough to know that your impressions are good.
It's a great show, and what I love about it is that, like, on the surface, it's not funny at all.
Yeah,
But if you understand that it's not supposed to be, that it's funny because it's not,
mhm,
almost in some ways, that's the genius of the show. the genius of Beavis and Butthead is similar to Trailer Park Boys,
Yeah.
same creator, which is why I bring it into the conversation. And then on the other hand, you have Letterkenny, which is there is Fart Book, and there
But here's the
are.
thing. So I've come around on Fart Book now because I was one of the people who were like, Fart Book, just skip it. It's not. But
Oh, I would never skip it, but I would
yeah,
love to hear why why you were there.
because the writing in Letterkenny is actually really strong, and we joke about it, but it feels like Letterkenny was just born out of a bunch of writing kind of assignments that Jerry Keeso gave himself. What if I wrote an episode that had to do with the effect of social media on people? And that's what Fart Book is. It's his statement on social media. Um, like it or not, that's what it was.
I'd
Like
have a fart.
um his statement on reality television is Uncle Eddie's Trust, when Uncle Eddie dies, and they do the whole, like, there are touchstone episodes throughout where Jared is saying things, and he's
It
saying things through
always.
through the bad, the dumb humor, but the writing in it is sublime. Like, you talk about the Roberta Bondar story, but that kind of dialogue.
Oh my god, it's like who's on first?
Yeah,
It's so
yeah,
people don't understand like the level of perspicacity and
mhm,
depth that it takes to write that dialogue.
yeah,
I love that outtake video of that scene in particular,
mhm,
and them watching them struggle to get through their own dialogues just goes to show how strong the material is.
yeah,
Like it's and you think about talk about the wise men tradition.
mhm.
You know, like it is really interesting to think of it in that sense
It's
because I really
dense,
do see that.
dense dialogue, really well written. The ants on Sea-Doos, what an, like, nonsensical cold open, and Tanya still hates it, really. Like, she doesn't understand it, but I get it now. I've come to appreciate. Yeah, if you're just sitting around talking about dumb shit, and it's like, what if ants could ride Sea-Doos? And then, but then it's like it's a yes anding thing where just keep going. Like, don't say it's stupid. Like, talk it out. Like, how would that manifest itself?
Well, and what the reason, which is crazy, which
Yeah,
the reason that I think it's crazy personally, that I love it so much, is that I am not a yes and person.
yeah,
As a comedian, my roots are not musical. My roots are comedic, but where I come from, I'm very much of the Matt Stone, Trey Parker, South
mhm,
Park school of writing, where jokes need to be. It never gets to "and then," it's always "therefore,"
mhm,
"because of,"
right, yeah,
but you get to "and then" and it's done.
yeah.
But, Jared's, use of "yes, and his, refusal to draw a line that he wouldn't cross, not to say that there were ever any, like, severe lines, I don't think, in my opinion, but that you didn't know if he was gonna take it one step further, and then he did, and then you're
Oh,
just
yeah.
like, "Ah."
All you have to do is listen to a Shoresy chirping session in either Letterkenny or Shoresy, and know that there are no lines he won't cross, and he'll go anywhere. But in the best possible way, I think. Like, it's never been about talking down to people. It's always been about just just being brilliant, and like the dialogue, and the turn of phrase, and yeah.
Anytime I've ever run a workshop, for other English teachers, based on anything, I use the alliteration, cold opens
Oh,
as
the alphabet aerobics, they
yeah,
call 'em. Yeah.
well, that's the name of the
Yeah.
Black Alicious song where he does the same thing,
Oh,
which I highly recommend that you check out along with
hmm,
Chemical Calisthenics. Alphabet Aerobics and Chemical Calisthenics, both by Black Alicious, unbelievable songs. But Alphabet Aerobics, similar to the ABCs of Letterkenny,
yeah.
are alliterative, intros, which for me as a writer, as an English teacher, I mean, that I remember, I believe it's the first episode of season 3 where they do the first one,
Yeah.
in the snow. parkas, particularly
Yeah.
particular. Yeah, I can't even like
Oh, no, I
remember
wouldn't even try to.
but just I remember just marveling because I love alliteration. And I had always felt that the writing in Shoresy, or excuse me, the writing in Letterkenny, they're both great. They're both written by him, but the writing in Letterkenny I thought was so great. And then I remember watching that episode and being like, oh yeah, everything I thought about this,
Mhm.
like technically, is 100% correct.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole series was just it felt like a series of writing workshops that, Jared gave himself. Okay, this time I'm going to challenge myself by writing a rap, Katie's rap at the beginning of, I think, season 9. Brilliant. And again, just and it's serving the
And
story, it's telling, what happened last season and what's coming up and stuff like that. So well done.
well, I mean, how about finishing up the show, folks? I'll be right back, but finishing out the show with this.
Right. Yeah. Like I mentioned, so Steiner just showed his copy of the smoke Sun Darts LP, like vinyl album of the.
Okay, Letterkenny presents Sundarts
Mhm.
by Jim Dickens, and
Yeah.
complete with the lyrics on the back with your mama and your daddy
Yeah.
in there. I mean, just like the fact that they produced a record
Mhm.
for a nerd like me.
Yeah.
And shout out to the Shoresy subredditor who hooked this up.
Hmm.
You are a gem of a human being. We're gonna put this here for the rest of the
On
episode.
on the episode, they presented their thesis. There's a formulaic way of writing a hit country song. They presented it. They showed how they were going to do it, and then they fucking did it. And it's I'm not a huge country music fan, but
Oh my god, I listen to this all the time. Are you
okay,
kidding me? I'm not a country music fan at all,
me
but
neither.
this shit is on fucking replay. I got the vinyl. I reached out to the store and I was like, "Please tell me you're going to press more copies of this." And they're like, "We have zero intention of pressing more copies
Yeah,
of this." I was like,
so brilliant.
"You don't understand. There is a group of vinyl collectors that I know who I've all convinced to become Letterkenny fans."
Yeah.
So like you have this amazing rippling effect where like not it's your show started as a debate where you are convincing each other about the show and you've wound up convincing a whole lot of other people
Oh, I
about
don't
the
know. We're
show.
not, we're not going to take credit for that. I think we're there once people have seen the light. We're there to help them, guide them toward the light, and to translate all the Canadian on the show, right? Because there's a lot of that. I mean, before we started, there was an American Letterkenny podcast called "How Are You Now." They became they're based out in Seattle. They became friends of ours, and I mean, they're great, and we've had them on our podcast a bunch of times too. But yeah, we're just trying to give the Canadian angle because there's the one thing that I mean we appreciates about Jared Keeso is he's unapologetically Canadian. Like
Mm.
what Americans don't understand unless you listen to our podcast is the national inferiority complex Canada has, and it's because we're inundated. We're like with American culture because we have for when I was a kid like 13 channels, 9 of them would be US networks. Like we'd have like 2 or 3 Canadian channels. Everything else is coming up from the US. We're bombarded by the noise coming up from the US. That's why we have CanCon rules in radio. So our radio stations are
It was I
forced
believe I
to
believe
play 30% Canadian music, or else they would all only play American music, right?
I think it was Robin Williams show. Canada's a noisy downstairs neighbor. Keep it down there, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So, and the point I was making, anyway,
We're the noisy neighbor.
you're the noise in it, but that's not the point I was making. I was like, the inferiority complex, right? So, um, when you have a creator like Jared, so often, like we have a big television and film industry up here, but it's always been for American productions, right? Toronto was always playing New York or Chicago. Vancouver was always playing an American cities, you know, so many shows have been shot up here that you would be surprised were shot in Canada and not, in LA or Hollywood, or New York. Um, but only until recently did Canada start saying, okay, no, we need to, display some of our own culture. And I mean, Trailer Park Boys started that, they were unapologetically from, Eastern Canada. I feel like Jared Keeso is continuing that, right? He's carrying that baton, and he's like, I'm going to write jokes. I'm going to write a lot of really inside jokes that only Canadians are going to get. But the Americans who enjoy it are going to look it up, and are going to figure it out, you know?
I resemble that remark because my lovely wife, who is Canadian, she has, brought me in on the joke on a lot of the Canadian humor
Yeah.
that goes on, about, sticks and so forth. And,
Mhm.
um and it's been, it's really been awesome to have this kind of fusion of like my show style and like her strong Canadian back, because she is unapologetically Canadian as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And when we were at the Shoresy Fall Classic, she was shouting out all her questions in French, and they like everybody, like she and Delaney are, I think, are from a similar area in Quebec. And
Right.
like, it was just great to see her like in her element with Canadians, like talking, like speaking in French, like the way it didn't matter that they were in Chicago.
Yeah.
It's like, no, fuck it, we're gonna be who we are, we're gonna be Canadian, and we're gonna be proud of it wherever we go.
So yeah, and that's, I think, why we appreciate what Jared's done with it and what the trailer park started, and shows like Kim's can, like shows that have like crossed the border, culturally, where Americans are like, oh, I like this show, and it just so happens to be a Canadian show. I mean, look what happened with Schitt's Creek when that blew up, right? Like
Yeah,
that was a huge deal, down there, and as a result up here too, because finally a show, and it didn't pretend not to be Canadian. It was
right,
right. So whereas many years, like growing up, whenever I saw something, it was like that kind of looked like downtown Toronto, but no, it's New York or Chicago. But no, it was fucking downtown Toronto.
right.
It is what it is. But so we're appreciating that. I think the Canadian culture is finding its own voice now, which is kind of neat to see, to
And I,
witness.
I love to hear this. So I was fascinated that they did the Shoresy Fall Classic.
Mhm.
As someone who's worked in the entertainment industry for roughly 19 years at the time of this airing, um, it amazes me that the cast of a Canadian television show could screw something like that together, and it was awesome.
It was so much.
Like it
We went to the
was,
Toronto one. Yeah, it was great.
oh my god! Like what a fun time! And like, we didn't do the meet and greet at the beginning, but we were fortunate enough to meet a bunch of the guys at Bub City afterwards. But we did get to do the Q&A, and what just like wonderfully kind, real people.
Mhm.
Like every single one of them to a man, was just genuine, nice, kind, really like, made you feel like they gave you 100% of their attention all the time, which is insane. And then they went out and played some amazing hockey
Yeah, yeah.
with some of, my personal heroes, and it's just is there this sense yet, or has there been, or is it growing, of national pride for what Letterkenny is? I mean, Letterkenny capped with 12 strong seasons. Shoresy is I think in progress towards the end of season 4 right now at the time of this taping.
Mhm.
They've done this fall classic with 5 hockey games in America and 1 in Canada.
And there'll be more coming. There's more
Oh
coming.
hell yes, let's fucking go.
They're gonna hit the West Coast as well, because there's no way in hell they're not gonna do one in Calgary, because that's Keeso, and he's a big Calgary Flames fan. They're gonna hit LA. They're gonna hit Vancouver, and
I just want it back in Chicago,
yeah,
selfishly,
yeah.
but
It might be a while before they do that again, but I think the first 5 games, I think, were a tester, to see whether this idea would fly, and I think it did. I think it was a big success. So I think I mean, who knows now, actually, with all the tariff and crap that's happening right now. But Yeah,
For those who don't know, the Shoresy Fall Classic. Now, Shoresy, similar to Letterkenny, takes place in Canada. It's primarily about hockey. The
yeah,
cast of the show are all hockey players,
yes,
including some former NHL players. And they went on the road and played 6 games against alumni of NHL teams
yeah.
in 6 cities, 5 in the United States and 1 in Canada. And I think it's, you know, it's, Trailer Park Boys, toured plenty with
Mhm.
comedy,
Yes, they did.
and Letterkenny toured plenty with comedy as well
Yep.
during
They
their
had a very
time.
successful sold out tour when they went around too, and so this Shoresy version of that Letterkenny Live.
But it's from just, I mean, like, speaking from an event production perspective,
Mhm.
it's like a comedy tour and a hockey game
Yeah,
tour. I mean, we're those are 2 different stratospheres of production detail, let alone, accommodation and
you're
s
right, and
you
I mean,
know
but I think it's brilliant. It's Jared Keeso's. This is part of all. This is all part of Jared's master plan, right? Letterkenny Problems, which was the YouTube series that started Letterkenny, was his way of getting a TV show produced. Letterkenny was his way of honing his writing and acting chops, because his ultimate thing was he wanted to do the best hockey show possible. And now he's done that with Shoresy. And the Letterkenny live tour was walked so that the Shoresy Classic could run, right? Like they they
Huh.
they floated that trial balloon out there. It worked. I think it was a pretty good success in Detroit, Buffalo, Boston, Chicago, Toronto. They're going to do it again on the west side of the continent, and it'll be great. I mean, I think they tried it because they weren't sure whether there would be any demand for it, and I think they proved that there was demand for it. So I think it's going to happen.
I mean, I can only speak for the Chicago show because that's the one that I was at. But I mean, there were lines out the door. VIP was sold out. There was lines for merch. They specifically announced the wrong location of Bub City, like, because they knew the after. And the ad was overwhelming. Again, shout out Bub City for giving Secondhand Talent a seat for that after party because we needed that table.
Yeah,
But it was wild to see so many Blackhawks fans, Letterkenny fans, Shoresy fans show up at the Allstate Arena to see the cast of Shoresy play and they only sold the lower bowl, but that lower bowl sold out.
yeah.
And it was wild. I'm not gonna lie, it was wild to see.
Mhm.
As
And I
someone
mean,
who
again, and Jared, who, like you mentioned before, was a hockey player who failed up into acting, failed up
yeah,
into being his own his own producer for his own basically TV empire up here in Canada.
yeah.
Like, how'd you like your plan B to be that, right? Um, he's fulfilled dreams. Like when the Toronto one, the Toronto game when they were up here, he got halfway through the third period, he switched teams and ended up playing on the Leafs. And of course he did, because he got to play alongside legendary Wendell Clark and oh, I forget his name now. Anyway, a couple of like Leaf legends that I'm sure when he was growing up in Southern Ontario, even though he's a Calgary Flame fan, he was probably a huge fan of
Oh
these players
yeah.
and got to play now beside them. It was all
Wow.
his doing. He made that happen.
What an incredible feat to
Yeah,
engineer that into existence.
for sure.
That's just something special.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have this saying on our podcast, "In Jared we trust." We'll follow him. Whenever he creates something new, we'll probably we'll cover it. We'll announce it. We'll fan out about it, and until he gets sick of us and tells us to stop. But I don't think I think he's appreciative of it. I mean, we hear from him every once in a while. He sent us
Oh,
a
that's awesome.
bag. He sent us a bottle of Dom and a really nice letter thanking us for everything we do. And we've been invited.
Whoa.
Yeah, we've been invited up to Sudbury. We recorded one of our episodes from the Letterkenny kitchen set. We recorded another episode from the Shoresy locker room set. We've
Huh.
we've met all the cast members, or most of the cast members, and I can say, like, like what you'd said before is true. Only good people. We haven't encountered one asshole. in my
That's
group.
that's a pretty radical ratio right
Yeah.
there. Not
I
gonna
mean,
lie.
I've had lunch with Hitch, with Terry Ryan. I've interviewed him on 2 occasions now. When I was in Montreal, Joe Dolo invited me to his studio. I got to go to his recording studio and witness his creative process. They're all just such good
Blessings on
guys.
myself.
Yeah, they're all just good.
I'm a big fan of him. Outside of Shoresy, anyway. I'm glad that it got to that. I was that. Another thing I love about Keeso is his promotion of music in
Oh, yeah.
that show
He
and the way
chooses
that
all the music himself,
yeah,
uh, which I think blows a lot of people away, but yeah, uh, I mean, he's a musician
it blew
himself.
me away.
He's a
It blew.
musician himself, right? So
Oh, I didn't know
he's
that. I
he's a
didn't know
drummer.
that at all.
Alright, so here's some, fun facts about Jared Keeso. Is a drummer, and he had a two-piece band called Sistine Shrapnel, and it was him on drums, and on guitar was, McDonald. The guy who plays, Michaels in Shoresy is
Oh yeah,
guitarist, so they're like a two-piece, kinda like 21 Pilots type of thing.
that's
Yeah,
amazing.
there's like if you can find it, there is some
Oh
video
my god.
on YouTube of the 2 of them playing, and it's great.
I'm just imagining that and that.
Yeah. So when you watch Letterkenny and you see a lot of these, like, slow-mo scenes and set to music and stuff like that, that's all in his brain. That's all him thinking, "I love this song. How can I use it in the show?" And
I
it's
mean, like OCM
yeah.
and Letterkenny
Yeah.
during the when they come out to play, like it's just like I remember watching that with Justine, and she's just like, "This was the most perfect song that possibly could have played at this moment." I was like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it kind of is."
Yeah.
Never thought I'd say that about OCM, but like, yeah, that's really like exactly the right song that needed to be played at this moment
Or
in
when
time.
they did that tunnel brawl in Shoresy in season 3, and it's set to disco. It's set to,
Oh
Born to
yeah.
Be Alive, right? Like, he yeah,
Want to be alive.
yeah,
Doom,
exactly.
doom, doodle, doom, doom,
Or
doom, doom.
there's a French Canadian bossa nova song in the Letterkenny scene, which is an amazing fucking song we were introduced to because of Jared Keeso. And the band is Harmonium. They're from 1970s, and we
Mm,
learned about them watching Letterkenny. It's crazy.
incredible. Listening to you talk about um, it was really interesting to me because I don't know if what I do is a podcast. Um, I don't know if I don't know if this is like I mean, I think it is based on what I know of what podcasts to be. People have told me for a while, "Hey, you should do a podcast. Podcast would be something you should do." I've kind of been like, "All right, what is that? What is
So
that?"
I
Like,
think you're overthinking it, man. You're
that's what I think.
yeah.
Also, I think I'm overthinking it. I feel like this is a podcast, and
Of
I'm
course it
it's
is. It's
yeah.
a recorded conversation distributed by RSS. I mean, that's a podcast, like, to
All right,
by definition. And I
fair
mean,
play.
podcasts are all different, right? Like the 3 that I produce couldn't be more different from each other, right? Like Just Good Business, there are interviews that I do with like business people. Uh Yes, We Are Open is a storytelling one that's heavily edited. I go out, or record interviews, I come back, I edit them into a story. Uh the produce stand is live to pod. I record it live to pod. It's like a radio show because I don't edit at all. We record
Mm,
it, I put it out 5 minutes later.
mm.
It's just and I play the clips live. We react to them live. Everything's done live. I've got my trusty little Rodecaster Pro here with all my you know sound effects and shit like that. It's like a morning zoo, whatever, right?
Oh man, I love that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So those are 3 ways to do it, but there's no one way to do it. If we're just recording this as a conversation and putting it out, that's a podcast. Anything that's delivered via RSS feed and recorded and delivered is a podcast.
Fair enough. I mean, I really enjoy getting these conversations out there because I feel like I feel like there aren't a lot of places where people are like looking really into like how the sausage is made when it comes to things like live music, like creating an actual podcast and not just listening to podcasts about other things. But to have like, like more of a Seinfeld-esque, like a podcast about podcasts,
Yeah.
like a show about nothing. But it's more than that. It's like it's I think this is a show about kind of like the meat and bones of how live music and other forms of media are made. And yeah, I guess that makes it a podcast at this point. I mean, it's really hard to believe that you've been podcasting, you said, for 5 years, and you've got, I think, something like 275 episodes of the Produce Stand out at this point.
I think we just published 283 last night. So yeah,
That's
yeah,
so
almost. Yeah.
yeah. I knew it was right under 300. We're at the end of this season, we'll be closing with 99 episodes, and see, the first episode of season 6 will be our 100th episode,
Mhm.
which is kind of insane to think that in 3 years I've self-produced and recorded at least 100 episodes of a podcast.
Yeah, it's a milestone. We made a big deal out of our 100th episode, and then I think we made a big deal out of our 200th episode as well. Because as you, I think most podcasts don't go past episode 6 or 7, right? Because
I had no idea. I mean, I remember, for our 50th episode, we made a big deal. I had my wife on, she does all of our social media. She does all of our promo, all of our YouTube stuff. I had her on as our guest because she's the secondhand talent of Secondhand Talent. And not to give anything away, but we do have a bit of a surprise planned for our 100th episode, and we are trying to make a big deal out of it because it's important to us, and
I think it's a big milestone. 100 episodes is nothing to laugh at. And like I was saying, if maybe you didn't know this, most podcasts don't go past episode 6 or episode 7. Like when we talked about all those podcasts that were started during the pandemic, most of them fizzled away because the creators realized, oh, this is actually a lot of work. This actually takes up a lot of time and is a lot of work. If you're doing it right and if you're doing it worthwhile, it does take up time and involves some work. So you have to really love it, or unless you're making good money at it. Either way, one of the two has to happen, or else
what yeah, at the moment I'm in the camp in the former. And I do Secondhand Talent because I really love it. I have so many stories of my own as Secondhand Talent, and so many of my friends are work in different capacities in live music and on other sorts of behind the scenes areas that, if I have stories, they have stories. And if they have stories, their friends have stories. And it's worth highlighting, as I always say, not just the guests we have on our show, but all of the people in the spaces in which they occupy.
yeah.
And I think it's just really great to know that we've got, a steadily growing community of people who are paying attention to these stories
Mhm.
and who are um, listening, with open ears and learning. And I think, sometimes the highest order of compliment I can get, like, I hope that folks who listen to this interview go out and check out the Produce Stand podcast. Go out and go ahead and check out the Just Good Business podcast. Go ahead and check out all of Allan's work. Go ahead and check out his bands. Go ahead and check out Letterkenny. Go ahead and check out Shoresy. Like, I remember when a fan reached out and said that they appreciated my interview with Joe Marcinek so much that they pre-ordered his new album.
Nice.
And I was like, that's exactly what I want this show to be, is to be like the people watch this and become interested in the art that the guest produces, and then goes ahead and invests their own money into that art. I feel like that's the highest order of compliment that I could get, like with Secondhand Talent.
And I feel also it's the only way forward now with new artists, right? Because it's so hard to make it now, and or make a name for yourself, especially as a musician. But I'm sure other arts the same. Uh, you need to tell your story, and you need to have people invested in your story to then buy into your art. And best way to do that is to talk about it and to have people like you shine a light on it and spread the message.
Hey, it's well, thank you, and it's so interesting. I have for as long as I've been doing stand-up comedy, which we're coming up on 2 decades now, and then with a 5-year pause in between, but back at doing it at the time of this taping, and, it feels good to be back on stage again, and it is wild that in the meantime, I get recognized more for the podcast than I do for stand-up, and I love it, and, it's amazing to have folks, like, at the time of this taping a couple days ago, I interviewed, Joe Marcinek, who's gonna be on this season for the 2nd time. Whether that interview has already aired or will be airing shortly, I
Mhm.
cannot yet tell you. But, at the time of this taping, he will also be on this season, and it's amazing and exhilarating to have guests come back on the show because it's like, oh man, they liked it enough the first time that they wanted to come back and talk some more about a new project or a different aspect of their art. And I really I recall specifically, I was looking around for other podcasts that
Mhm.
were platforming these kinds of stories, and I couldn't really find any. And then I saw that one of my friends sent me Trey Anastasio from Fish was doing these Instagram reels where he would go up to random like crew members and be like, "Hey, what you doing?" And I remember thinking, "Ah, so my only competition is Trey. Wonderful." But, I shot the gap. I saw the hole. I didn't see anyone else really asking for these stories and decided to, I don't wanna sit here and just tell my stories. That's not as interesting to me, but to be able to be a platform and a conduit for all the stories that I know are out there for our, comrades in the industry,
Mhm.
um, it feels pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. Like I really do enjoy it. And that is what, sustains and maintains the project, in the similar way that I'm sure that the produce stand has done for yourself.
Yeah, the produce stand has provided us with so many amazing experiences, not just the 4 of us, but some of our listeners and stuff who have been able to go up to Sudbury with us and experience, you know, some of the access that Letterkenny producers and Shoresy producers have given us, thanks to the stuff we've done through the produce stand. Um, so yeah, I don't make any money with the produce stand. It pays for itself. It just pay like we have some patrons, so that helps pay for hosting, and every once in a while, after 6 months of collecting, we might splurge on an experience that then we'll do for the podcast. We'll record a podcast somewhere, right? Um, and that's all you ask for, because that's we're doing this as a hobby, not as a profession. You're a stand-up comedian, I'm also a musician. As long as your hobbies pay for themselves, that's all I care about. Um, because I've got my day job that pays for the
Well,
bills.
Jerry Garcia said it best. You don't quit that day job no matter what they say. You don't quit that day job until the night job pays.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Al Grego. Al, thank you so much for being on the show. It has been an absolute pleasure getting to have this phenomenal, sprawling, wonderful conversation with you.
Thank you, Steiner.
And folks, this has been Steiner with another episode of Secondhand Talent, and we will see you next Wednesday. And that's a podcast. There we go.
Perfect. See,
Amazing.
that is a podcast, man.
Yeah, I say it at the end of every episode, and I still somehow I don't know.